Now, Pope Francis has been brilliant with all the signals of how he sees his papacy. Remember him travelling on a bus, settling his bill at the guest house where he'd stayed just before the conclave, embracing the sick and the diseased. This informality and humility has won him rave reviews, but now he's moved beyond the symbols and today given us his clearest view yet of how he wants the Catholic Church to be governed. He says power is too concentrated in the Vatican. In his apostolic exhortation, he says he'd prefer a church which was bruised and dirty and out on the streets, rather than one which was unhealthy, confined and clinging to its own security. He's also called on Christians to embrace Muslims with respect. Well, with me to unpick what Pope Francis has written is Austen, Ivereigh, a Catholic writer and commentator, and he's just returned from Buenos Aires, where he's researching a new book about Pope Francis, and he joins us from Oxford. Austen, Ivereigh, very good to see you. Thank you very much for being with us. So what do you make of what he's had to say?
I think it's very much him, and I think it brings together two things which you don't often find together in a papal document. One is this very kind of almost evangelical spirituality. So he talks about spirit-filled evangelizers, people who have a personal knowledge of Jesus Christ, language which I think will be very appealing to a certain kind of evangelical Christian. And on the other hand, this very fierce critique, almost prophetic denunciation of capitalist injustices, of the inequality between rich and poor, of the way that people, the young and the old and the unemployed, are discarded in a system where, you know, the market is worshipped as an idol. It's fierce, it's quite thrilling stuff really, it's very, very clear language, it's quite a hefty document, but it's packed with things which are very, very characteristic of him. And above all, it's about reshaping the church for mission. He wants people out there, involved in people's lives, with the poor, you know, not self-referential, not closed up inside and rotting. So it's a call to mission, and it's a compelling invitation, I think, to Catholics around the world to kind of get on board with his vision of the church.
And, you know, people were wondering after his installation as Pope whether, you know, the Curia would get their hands on him, they would drive out the sort of Jesuit in him and sort of make him much more one of their figures. Looks like they haven't.
Yeah, and I tell you what, he played a blinder from the very beginning, because he went to live in the Santa Marta guest house rather than in the Apostolic Palace, which means actually that he couldn't, in a sense, be controlled. And he keeps his own diary, he makes his own phone calls. He has a couple of secretaries, of course, to help him. But basically, you know, he's put in place his own system, really, of governance. And he's doing that in order precisely to be able to reform this institution, the Curia, the Vatican bureaucracy, to make it serve the world church much better. Now, in this document, he's talked about the need for greater decentralization. That means greater involvement by the world's bishops in the decisions which affect the Catholic Church. He's already spoken a number of times about this, and clearly he's very keen to do it. There's a kind of irony or paradox at the heart of this, of course. He's talking about how, you know, in a sense, the Pope needs a less of a role in the world church, and yet he personally, of course, has a kind of stature and a profile at the moment, which in a way puts him, you know, way above all the other bishops in the world. So there's a paradox there.
I mean, you know, I suppose it's worth just reflecting a moment on the fact that, you know, Austen, were you and I sitting down a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, invariably the topic of conversation would be the problems besetting the Catholic Church, the scandals, whether they be sexual or financial. And yet, in a very short order, he seems to have turned things round, and suddenly the Catholic Church is getting, you know, good coverage.
Well, you know, I used to get called all the time to say, either explain what's going on because there's a scandal, or explain this kind of outrageous church teaching which seems so offensive to us. Nowadays, I think people want to know from Catholics, you know, explain to us about Francis, you know, what does he mean when he says this? It is quite remarkable how he's turned things around. Now, he hasn't actually changed a single, you know, bit of church teaching. In fact, he's very much, and in this document, defends the church's position, you know, on abortion, on various things, on marriage and all sorts of things. But what he says is that we have to start with something else. We have to start with the love of God for people, and especially of the poor. We have to meet people in their suffering and in their need. And because he says this, and he does it every Wednesday in that Wednesday audience, he's out there, you know, kissing, hugging the disabled, you know, people covered in sores. I think he has a kind of a credibility. He walks the walk, he talks the talk, and I think people really, really respect him and are listening to him because they see that he is love in action himself.
I mean, the next question may go from sort of sublime to the ridiculous, from the humble to a good deal less than that. But there are these reports circulating in the Italian press that Silvio Berlusconi, the disgraced former Prime Minister, man found guilty of fraud, could become Russia's next ambassador to the Holy See.
Yeah, I've seen those reports. Both Putin's spokespeople and Berlusconi's spokespeople have denied it. I think it's pretty unlikely. The Vatican would certainly, they haven't said anything, of course, but I think they would take a pretty dim view of it because it would look like it was circumventing Italian justice, which I think the Vatican would really take a dim view of. So I'm inclined personally not to take those reports seriously.
OK, just one other thing. The other thing that interested me in what he had to say was when he was talking about how the Catholic Church needed to show more respect towards Muslims. I mean, why do you think he's chosen to say that?
Yeah, I can tell you, having just been in Buenos Aires and talked to people who were very close to him, and among the people who were closest to him were, in fact, Jewish rabbis and Muslim leaders. And he has a tremendous understanding and empathy for other faiths. And I think he sees particularly the dialogue with Islam as being the crucial one at the moment, of course, because of the situation of Christians around the world and the rise of fundamentalism and so on. One thing he says in that document, which has not been picked up, which actually I think is quite remarkable, he's called on Christian countries to welcome Muslim immigrants. And that's not something I think many people will want to hear, but very typical of Francis. He wants the doors to open on all sides. He wants dialogue. He wants a deeper relationship, not to change people's minds, not to change people's beliefs, but so they enter into what he calls a culture of encounter, to build a new kind of a dialogue, a new way of living together in society. And he lays out in this document the principles which he sees as underlying that, and that involves a dialogue with culture, with science, with other faiths, with people of no faith. He sees his role, I think, is to try to forge, if you like, a new basis for people to live together in the modern world. It's quite exciting stuff.
Yeah, very briefly, he really is seizing his moment, isn't he?
I think he thinks he hasn't got long, actually. I think, you know, he is the age he is. He's 76. He probably thinks he's got, you know, 2 or 3 years of activity. Then I think probably, you know, his age will get to him. And I think he is in a rush. This document actually feels like he's put everything in it, you know, because I think he doesn't know how long he's got, but he's determined in that short time to change the church.
OK, Austen, Ivereigh, grateful to you, grateful for you kind of persisting with the problems you were having with that earpiece. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. We'll be back very